dinner at 6 o'clock in the evening. We talked about many things, but we never talked about racism. We never talked about civil rights, and we never talked about Martin Luther King Jr. So how I got to know who King was overhearing conversations about him, conversations about his nonviolent sit-ins, about his marches, and about all of the things that he was fighting for, all the civil rights that he was fighting for everyone. When I was about 12 or 13 years old, I was listening to a radio station. I was the only one home, and the radio station was called Whammo. It was for the Black families and people that lived in the Pittsburgh area. The host at that time asked the listeners to call in and to share who their hero was. You know, I was young. I had never been on a radio before. I never heard my voice on a radio before. And so, you know, I was a little bit hesitant, but I pushed through and I called and I let them know that Martin Luther King Jr. was one of my heroes. And that was the first time I ever spoke out or spoke up about him. That's why this evening gives me so much pleasure to be here, because it's just remarkable to hear all the things that this man had done. The biographies that are written about Martin Luther King are usually written by our own students or by whoever the reader is. The speakers are here and they talk about things that happened in their lives and how Martin Luther King had an impact on them. So with that, I have a very short and brief poem. But after my poem, I am going to turn the presentation over into the hands of our Culture Pot leader and co-president, Amani Clark Bay, who will be bringing forth the biography of Martin Luther King Jr. So of course, the title of my poem is Martin Luther King Jr. Martin, a soft-spoken man, but a man of many words. Integrity and commitment go hand in hand, which seemed to start from the day of his birth. A minister, a father, an activist, and a friend. These are the many titles that was given to this man. He gave his life for every man's civil rights in hope that we would live to be free. Thank you, Martin, for your fight for equality.
Born Michael Luther King in Atlanta on January 15, 1929, middle child of Michael Luther King Sr. and Alberta King. His father was the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church and his mother a formal school teacher. Michael Luther King Sr. changed his name to Martin in honor of German Protestant religious leader Martin Luther, and later changed his Michael Jr.'s name to Martin. Martin attended the local public grammar school, Booker T. Washington, the local high school in the area. He had awesome public speaking abilities and had a major role in the school's debate team. During his junior year of high school, he won first prize in an oratorical contest sponsored by the Negro Elks Club in Dublin, Georgia. King was an outstanding student in high school and skipped 9th and 12th grade. During his high school junior year, Morehouse College announced that it would accept any high school juniors who could pass its entrance exam. Since an increased number of students were not furthered in their studies, the college needed to fill its classroom because many students had enlisted to serve in World War II. At age 15, Martin passed the exam and enrolled in Morehouse College in 1944. He had no plans to enter the ministry until he met and befriended Dr. Benjamin Mays, a scholar who convinced him that a religious career could be satisfying for him. In 1948, King graduated at the age of 19 from Morehouse with a BA in sociology. He then enrolled in Crozer Theological Seminary in Chester, Pennsylvania, and graduated in 1951 with a Bachelor of Divinity degree, and he achieved the Plaffker Award and the J. Lewis Crozer Fellowship Award. Martin entered Boston University in 1953 to become the doctoral studies in the systematic theological and received his PhD degree on June 5th, 1955. While attending the university, King met and married Coretta Scott. Due to Dr. King's upbringing in an activist family, his Christian faith, and the peaceful teachings of Mahatma Gandhi, he advocated civil disobedience and nonviolent resistance actions to segregation in the South in the late 1950s and 60s. These peaceful protests in the South were usually met with much violence. As the activists pushed on and the movement's momentum grew, Dr. King continued to appeal to Christians, Jews, Muslims, and to the ideals of all American people. Now, here's a list of a few of his important movements. 1955, Montgomery Bus Boycott. 1963, the massive March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom is where Dr. King's famous I Have a Dream speech was delivered outside of the Lincoln Memorial. 1964, Civil Rights Movement achieved two of its greatest successes. Number one, ratification of the 24th Amendment abolishing the poll tax. Number two, Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibited racial discrimination in employment and education and outlawed racial segregation in public facilities. And last but not least, number three, youngest person to win the Nobel Peace Prize. Dr. King traveled to Memphis, Tennessee on April 3rd, 1968 to support the sanitation workers' strike. He was told that it'd be very dangerous for him to be there, but he still delivered his I've been to the mountaintop speech, stating he was not afraid. He'd been to the mountaintop and seen the promised land. But at 6:01 p.m. on April 4th, 1968, Dr. King was fatally shot by a sniper standing on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee, and was pronounced dead at 7:05 p.m. The 39-year-old spokesman for the nonviolent civil rights movement was assassinated. With just a snap of a finger, he was gone. Only 4 days after the assassination, Congressman John Connors, an African-American Democrat from Michigan, introduced a bill that would make Dr. King's birthday a federal holiday. The bill was met with opposition, but kept the push to get it passed. It was a long, hard fought to battle the Congress to establish this holiday. Stevie Wonder, the musician, helped with this single hit song, Happy Birthday, and a petition with 6 million signatures. Conservative in the Senate made a push to change the name of the bill to National Civil Rights Day, but it did not pass. The bill went through the Senate with a vote of 78 for and 22 against. On November 2nd, 1983, President Ronald Reagan immediately signed a bill making Martin Luther King Jr. Day a federal holiday effective January 20th, 1986. Although it was not to be observed effective January 20th, 1986, most states did not observe the holiday until the year 2000. As a result, the third Monday of January each year is the day set aside as a federal holiday to celebrate Martin Luther King Jr., a day designated to honor the activist and minister assassinated in 1968, a day when the entire nation takes a pause to remember his great civil rights accomplishments that continues to inspire generations after generations of Americans. Now I'd like to give the stand to Chris Moncrief, who will give the biography of Logan Powell.
Logan Powell is the Maryland and Charles H. Debler IV Dean of Admission at Brown University. He is responsible for the identification, recruitment, and selection of all undergraduates seeking entrance to Brown. Powell works closely with students, faculty, staff, and alumni to capture and convey to potential students and their families Brown's distinctive approach to education, research, and service. He partners with the university leaders, including the Dean of College, Dean of Financial Aid, Vice President for Campus Life and Student Services, the Provost, and the President to develop, implement, and communication admission priorities. He also serves as Brown representative for a number of professional organizations and committees, including the Ivy League Dean of Admission, the Consortium on Financing Higher Education, the Common Application, and the College Board. Prior to joining Brown, Powell served as the Director of Admission at Princeton University. Previously, he served as a Senior Associate Dean of Admission at Bowdoin College and Senior Admissions Officer at Harvard University. He earned his Master's in Education from Harvard, with an emphasis in higher education and a Bachelor of Arts from Bowdoin College. Logan Powell began his journey to Kiski from Jacksonville, Florida. The son of a single parent, Logan attended Kiski on a scholarship given by a Kiski alumnus who would later become one of his closest friends and mentors. At Kiski, one of Logan's fondest memories was winning the Whippeal Track Championship with teammates who would become friends for life. So I would now like to welcome the speaker himself, Logan Powell.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for that very generous introduction. Far too kind. Let me just say how humbled I am to be speaking with all of you tonight. I never, certainly in my time at Kiski, thought that I'd be invited back for an opportunity as meaningful as this one is, as moving as this opportunity is, and as I think important as this moment is in our history in America, and for all of the Kiski boys who are there now, and all of the Kiski boys who are out making a positive difference in the world. So my really very sincere thanks to everyone in the Kiski family. Thank you to Culture Pot for having me. So certainly a special shout out to Carla Ross for extending the invitation and having me here virtually. Of course, I wish I was there in person to walk the grounds and remember some of the memories and relive some of the stories. Of course, I have to thank Mr. Bruningsson, who has done such amazing things at Kiski, someone who I've known for over a couple decades. Marcus Muster, who I saw before the webinar began. Thank you, my friend. Marcus got me through geometry. It was not my best subject, but I passed. As you heard, I went into college and graduate school, and I'm actually finishing business school at MIT right now, applying a lot of those math lessons that I learned when I was still at Kiski. So really my sincere thanks. I intend to keep my remarks brief. I think the best conversations are really the pithiest ones. Certainly want to thank any faculty members who are watching, past, present, future. Parents, thank you so much. Adam Shapiro, thank you. I think we'll talk again later. So my intent tonight is really to keep this relatively brief and to tell you a little bit about the things that I learned at Kiski, some life lessons that I take with me today. And what stands out to me is it's an idea that that resonated with me, that resonates with me now, and it's from a French philosopher named Montaigne. And what he said was that we can be knowledgeable with other men's knowledge, but we cannot become wise through other men's wisdom. And I found that very true. I think, for all of you Kiski boys, that may not mean anything to you now. And so what I will say is that I hope I can share some knowledge. I will share my wisdom, but you'll all have to have your own journey and you'll all have to chart your own path. But I hope that the lessons that I learned at Kiski that I can share with you now in brief may resonate with you as well. There may be something in my experience that you can draw upon that will make your experience better or brighter, or allow you to make a meaningful difference at Kiski and after you leave as well. You'll always be Kiski boys, so don't forget that part of things. I think you see the quote behind me, which I pulled from Kiski, which I think is so true. The short version of it is that intelligence plus character, that is the real, that is the goal of true education. And I have always found that to be true. I think some of those lessons I've learned were really more about character than they were about my academic work. And I have tried mightily every day since I left Kiski a long time ago to take what I learned and make the lives of those around me better and to pass on those lessons. And so I have 5 stories that I want to share with you. I promise these are really brief. I really do believe that that we should not subject you to death by webinar. I really hope that this can be a conversation, and any questions you have at the end, I'm of course happy to answer. I'm in this incredible position. I'm a kid who grew up in a trailer park in Jacksonville, Florida. I grew up on Spam sandwiches. We grew okra in our backyard. I often didn't know when the next meal was going to come. It was hard, it was a tough life, and Kiski gave me a chance. I arrived at Kiski having never seen the campus. I arrived at Kiski not knowing how to tie a tie. I arrived not knowing, which fork was my salad fork and which fork was the dinner fork. I didn't know up from down, left from right. I had no idea about anything. I was a poor kid from the trailer park in Jacksonville. And Kiski gave me that chance to do something, to take, what little talent I had, but, the fierce determination I had to try to make something of myself, gave me that chance. And I will forever, forever be grateful for that. And so I want to start, I have 5 really quick stories. The first one actually begins in my senior year at Kiski, 1992, spring of 92. We had a really good track team, really, really good track team. As you heard in the intro, we were the WPIAL champions my senior year. We were incredibly proud of that victory. Had some really good competition, some really great guys on the team. You saw some of the pictures from way back when. I don't intend to replicate those haircuts anytime soon, but those were some just incredible moments in my life, taking the Bluebird bus all over Western Pennsylvania and Eastern Ohio, hoping to win every track meet. And we came pretty close. So my senior year rolls around, and it's the IPSL championships at Western Reserve. And Western Reserve had a powerhouse team. I mean, they were just like stacked from top to bottom. So we go out, we run our hardest, and I was running 4 races that day. I was running 2 relay races and the 400 and the 800. So it was a brutally long day. So I had run the 4x800 to start the day off, ran the 400, won the 400, ran the 800, came in a close second to one of their really top runners. And I'm just exhausted. And we get through most of the meet, and Coach Yoder comes over and says to us, look, guys, WRA is just too far out in front. We're not going to be able to catch them. So essentially what he said was, no matter what you do, you're not going to win. But also, no matter what you do, you're not going to come in third. So we're finishing second in this race. And this was coming up to the 4x400, the last race of the day. So the 4x400, comes up, and what we find out is that there's quote unquote nothing on the line. We knew we were finishing second, whether we won the race or we came in dead last. And so my 3 teammates ahead of me just ran their hearts out. I get the baton in second place, and it was not super close, but I felt like I probably could have caught the guy ahead of me. And I was exhausted. I was just absolutely exhausted from racing. And I was kind of stuck in no man's land. I could have run my absolute best and maybe caught the guy in front of me, but I knew the guy behind me was never going to catch me. And so I took the baton in the place where we were in the meet overall, firmly in second. No chance of winning, probably no chance of getting third. And so I kind of just ran around the track. And I finished the race, and my teammates looked at me as if I had completely let them down. And I kind of said, what's up, guys? Like, why are you so dejected? And they said, we could have won that race. And I said, you know what? But yeah, it wouldn't have mattered. We still would have come in second. And they said, it didn't matter. It didn't matter because we should have all run our best in that relay race. And all 3 of them did, and I didn't. And I will never forget the looks on their faces. They eventually forgave me, and we're good friends now. But I'll never forget the look on their faces, and I'll never forget the feeling that I felt afterwards, that I'd let my teammates down. And so from that day forward, I've always said to myself, no matter what the eventual outcome may be, I'm always going to work my hardest. I'm always going to bust my butt, because it doesn't matter what place I come in necessarily. What matters is that I can look my teammates in the eye and say that I tried my damnedest. So lesson number 1 was never let your teammates down. Always work your hardest. Always do what you can to support your Kiski boys. The second story actually goes back to my junior year. I was in Clark Hall. I was a prefect. How I got to be a prefect, I don't know. I've never really been like a vocal leader. I've always been a little bit of an introvert. I've just tried to do the right thing and, work really hard. So there I am, my junior year in Clark Hall. Clark Hall, I know, is no longer, which sort of surprises me, because when we lived there, if you haven't seen photos of it, it was a real modern art masterpiece. It was absolutely brutal. It was one of the most hideous buildings you'll ever see in your life. And we thought indestructible. I mean, this thing was made of like concrete and steel, and it looked every bit of it, just exposed concrete and, steel beams. And we thought, after the apocalypse, also known as the year 2020, the only things left in the world would be Twinkies and Clark Hall. So Clark Hall didn't quite make it, but it had a good run. So I'm a prefect in Clark Hall my junior year. And we decided we were going to have this prank battle. And so one of the pranks we decided was we were going to start taking like these canisters. We had like these canisters of baby powder, believe it or not. And and by the way, I should ask for any senior administrators on the webinar right now. Please don't revoke my degree from Kiski for having shared this story, and I also don't mean to impugn any of my classmates. So please don't revoke their diplomas either. So we get into this prank battle, and like this, like these like canisters of baby powder getting thrown down the hallway. Don't ask me why. It was the dumbest thing in the world. And so this is after lights out. It's in the middle of the night, and the hallway fills with baby powder. I mean, it's just a huge cloud of baby powder all over the hallway. And the smoke detector goes off. So like the fire alarm goes off in Clark Hall. So we had one of the toughest, meanest, I now love him to death, but at the time I was terrified of him, Mr. Lane, German teacher, who was like a German ninja. He could move silently down the hallways and sneak up on you in ways that you never would have imagined, someone with his gruff bearing being capable of. And so immediately we just are stricken with panic because we just are sure that Mr. Lane will appear in the hallway and that we would all be expelled for setting off the fire alarm. Well, little did we know, downstairs was one of our other prefect friends, Marcus Schlegel. He's innocent by his name. So Marcus Schlegel's downstairs on the payphone. Yes, we had payphones back in the day in Clark Hall. So Marcus is downstairs on the payphone in Clark Hall talking to his girlfriend, and we're panicked. We don't know what to do. Smoke alarms are going off. We think the sprinklers are about to go off. We think we're about to get expelled. So we run back into our rooms. A couple of the boys are getting up and asking what's going on. We're yelling at them, get back in your room. You didn't see anything. Well, we knew that wasn't going to last because they saw the whole thing. Place is filled with what appeared to be smoke, and we're waiting for Mr. Lane to come up and like physically throw us off campus. All of a sudden, the fire alarm goes off. Marcus comes up, our prefect friend, and says, what the hell are you all doing? We said, Marcus, how did you do that? And he goes, well, there's like a fire alarm off switch and I turned it off. So we are just so relieved. We see our lives flash before our eyes. We realize we're probably not going to get expelled at that point. And the lesson I learned was recognize the near misses you have in your life, because you're going to have some. You're going to have some of those moments where you do something you shouldn't be doing, and you don't suffer the worst consequences in the world for it. Those near misses should be valuable lessons in your lives. Those near misses are not permission structures for you to do it again because you got away with it. The near misses are just that. You're gonna get hit at some point. So when you have a near miss, learn the lesson that you can take from it. Don't repeat those mistakes. Pass on the knowledge you've learned to the degree you can. Make the best of the moment in the situation. Be ready to fess up. Appreciate that it was a near miss. Be grateful for the opportunity to have a second chance, and always be willing to give someone else that second chance as well. A third quick story is about a classmate of mine from Kiski, someone who became a dear friend of mine, and I think sort of defied a lot of the odds that I thought were working against him. This is a good friend of mine named Mike Martin. Mike was a swimmer, but he was also on the track team. He was also on the cross country team. And he was not, let me just tell you, he was not a natural born runner. I mean, this guy had like duck feet. I love him to death, by the way, dear friend, but he had duck feet. He was not graceful. He was not a born runner. But through just mental fortitude, he ended up being one of the best cross-country runners on the team. He ended up being one of the best distance runners on the team. And he just did not, and none of what he did looked natural. I mean, it was just, he was not poetry in motion. He was just determined, though, come hell or high water, Mike Martin was going to finish the race, and he was going to finish it with nothing left in the tank. So Mike went off to the Naval Academy. And, like years went by. I visited him in his time at the Naval Academy because we were dear friends. Years go by, and I read this study, and it's sort of transformative to me in reading this story because it so typified Mike Martin. And it was about a study. I'll tell you a little bit more about the book in a moment, but the study was actually conducted in the 1940s at Harvard University. And the study took medical school students, all men at that time, put them on a treadmill. This is called the treadmill test. Took these students of all shapes and sizes, but young men in their 20s at Harvard Medical School, put them on a treadmill and gradually increased the speed and increased the grade, the incline. And so the purpose of the study was to see how long these young men, could stay on the treadmill after it went up and up and up and the speed became too much for them to handle. The idea was to see how long they were willing to suffer on the treadmill before they quit. And so this is what's called a longitudinal study. So the men at this point didn't know what the study was for. And so Harvard tracked them into their 80s. So this goes on for decades, they're studying these men. And what they found when they controlled, by the way, for body size and body shape, this is not like a fleetest of foot kind of thing. This is like adjusted for their body weight and body size, who stayed on the treadmill the longest. And what these researchers found was that the young men who stayed on the treadmill the longest actually ended up being the most successful later in their lives. And this study was articulated and detailed in the book Grit by Angela Duckworth. And the lesson I learned from it was that, talent is great, but grit is every bit as important as talent. I'm not a talented guy. Let me just, in that, there's no false humility in that statement. I have no talent. I have no talent in anything. But I was determined to be like those guys who stayed on the treadmill longer than anyone else because that was all I could do. I didn't have the talent that other people did, but I had the grit. And the guy who I know who is probably the definition of grit is this guy, Mike Martin. So he goes to the Naval Academy and graduates, and we sort of lose touch for a while. And totally randomly end up running into him in one of the biggest cities in the world. I run into him in New York City. And, we're in this restaurant and I hear, "Logan Powell, get your butt over here." He didn't say but he yells at me to get over there. And I yell at him, "Mike Martin." And we, of course, run across the restaurant and hug. And I ask him, how he's doing. He asks me how I'm doing. I go, "Well, so what are you doing now?" He goes, "Oh, I'm on SEAL Team 1, man." And and of course he was, because he was the toughest guy I had ever met. And he wasn't graceful at all. But that grit got him to the point where he was a commander of a SEAL team. And he was so incredibly humble about it. And I think typified how far grit and hard work can take you. And the fact that he helps defend this country, for all the years that he did, I think is testament to what he learned at Kiski. The fourth story is a fairly quick one, but it relates to what I'm wearing. I'm wearing my Kiski blue and gray, which you may not be able to see, but this is my Kiski blue jacket, and this is my white shirt and my Kiski tie. So well after Kiski, and I'm into my career, I was working at Princeton. I was the director of admissions at Princeton. I've always been really dedicated to supporting our troops, supporting our armed forces. And so I did a lot of work with the Army. I did a lot of work with the Marines. I have some really good friends who are active duty Navy SEALs. And I had this great opportunity when I was at Princeton to spend a lot of time with the Army. And so through the time that I spent with the Army, I was offered the opportunity to go skydiving with the Army elite parachute team, which is called the Golden Knights. And so I don't know a whole lot about, elite parachuting. And so I head off to the base, this huge base in New Jersey called Fort Dix. And so the way that the skydiving sort of operation was going to happen is you take off in this plane with this huge sliding door, and you essentially circle. It takes quite a while actually to get to altitude because you're just sort of corkscrewing farther and farther up into the air. So it gives you a lot of time to think and overthink and ask questions and second guess the decision you made. And so we're on the way up and we're, corkscrewing up, and it's taking minutes and minutes and minutes. And so I'm talking to my jump buddy about this, and I was like, are you sure? Like, how do you, did we do all the proper checks? And, at what point is it too late to back out? Because I'm looking out the window now and I'm thinking, I don't need to tell this story. I'll be perfectly fine not jumping out of a plane with the Army Golden Knights. Like, if you took me down, I'd probably be okay with it. And he goes, you know what, sir? When we get up here, he said, we're not really nervous. I said, well, how in the world? It was like, do you see, have you looked out the window? There's a lot to be nervous about. And I'll never forget what he said to me. This guy was a lot younger than I was. And he said, do you know what we focus on? He said, we focus on keeping it simple, but doing it absolutely right. And that really stuck with me because there weren't a whole lot of moving parts going on with the jump that we had to do. But what he said was, in those few things that we have to do every single time we board this plane, we have to get them absolutely right. And so as I've gone through my life, I've thought about that lesson, and I've thought about all of the times I could have made things more complex. I could have thought about a more complicated solution to things. I could have thought about, much grander plans, much broader areas of focus. And then I remind myself, do the simple things, but make sure you do them absolutely right. And so one of those simple things is just my daily routine. It's just making sure that the simple things, the little things I'm supposed to do every single day, I do absolutely the right way. For those people who know me really well, they'd be able to vouch for me on this. I took the lesson I learned at Kiski about keeping things simple very much to heart, and the blue and gray is still with me. I have 5 pairs of dress pants in my closet upstairs. Every one of those pairs of pants is gray. I have 5 pairs of gray slacks that I rotate 1 pair a day and then send them to the dry cleaner. I have 3 jackets, they're all blue. And this tie I wear almost every single day. I have to wear a tie. And so I keep it simple, but I always make sure that I do it exactly the right way, no matter what it is. And so I hope that that lesson stays with you as well. My last story actually comes from a day when I wore pretty much exactly the same thing I'm wearing right now. It was graduation day, my senior year. And my mom, who was a secretary for almost her entire life, she just retired a couple of years ago, just absolutely busted her butt to help support me get through Kiski. I went to Kiski, as you heard in the introduction, through the generosity of another Kiski boy, believe it or not, someone who I got to know later in life, a Kiski boy who went on to Princeton, was an All-American miler when he was at Princeton, and whose name is now on the baseball field, Alan Andrini. He's the one who helped get me through Kiski, though I didn't know it for many, many, many years afterwards. But my mom was one of those other people, and so she didn't have the money to fly me home. She didn't have the money to drive and pick me up. So I'd see her, really twice a year. I'd see her for Christmas, and I'd see her at one other point in the year, but I worked at summer camp at Kiski, so I might not even see her in the summer. So she really had no idea what my life was like. And so she came down, and this is my graduation year, and I remember seeing all the faculty members who helped get me through, including Mr. Muster, including some really transformative figures in my life, some of whom are probably still at Kiski and some of whom have moved on. But I remember thinking in that moment that those are the people who made an impact on my life. They were there for me. And I wouldn't have gotten through it without them. And in that moment, I hoped that I had made them proud. And so as I go through my life, I think about how I can make my mom proud. I think about how I can make Kiski proud. And so for all of you Kiski boys, whether you are currently at Kiski or whether you're Kiski graduates who are tuning in for this, I hope that means something to you too. I hope that in all of the things you do, you're making someone proud. That has been my goal since I arrived at Kiski. I've learned some incredibly valuable lessons in my time there. I take those lessons with me in everything I do. I try not to ever let my team down. I always work as hard as I possibly can. Um, I remember those people who demonstrate grit and work to their absolute potential. I keep it simple and I try to do it the right way, and I always try to make people proud. And so I hope that resonates with you in some way. I hope that this conversation can be beneficial to you or to someone else. And I just want to say how proud I am of Kiski for always doing the right thing. And so with that, I will pause my remarks and I think ask Adam if there are questions or conversations that we should have from here, but I'm happy to hear any questions that anyone might have or solicit my thoughts on anything at all.
So thank you so much, Logan. Great stories that you shared with us. And at this point, we will open this up to questions. And there's two ways you can do that. You can either, I know most of you are sitting out there in your groups, in your Res Life classes. So you can either sign on that way, or there's a Q&A comment box that you can use as well. I'll start honestly in the vein of just clarifying something that you mentioned, the story that you told, and then hopefully buy some time for some other guys who are thinking about some questions. I just want to refer back to your story about the prank wars. And my takeaway from that was that you sounded deeply regretful of the disruption that you caused in Clark Hall, and that you feel bad about it. And in no way, shape, or form are you endorsing or condoning that type of behavior by our current Kiski boys in our dorms. Is that correct?
That is a much better assessment than I think I offered. And what I tried to say was, we were terrified. We were really terrified because I was convinced. So Adam, here was the thing for me. I had no safety net. For me, if I had been expelled, I would have been back living with my mom in the basement, just scratching for pennies and Spam sandwiches. There was nowhere for me. There was no soft landing for me. And so I tell that story expressly to say that sometimes you get away with things, but you don't always do. And so I learned my lesson. And so, let me tell you, I kept my nose as clean as a whistle after that. And I in no way condone anything resembling prank wars in any of the dorms or anywhere on campus.
Thank you. And remember, we have you recorded, so those words are now indelible. Thank you.
Good.
Again, any questions, feel free to jump in. Okay, I've got a question, Mr. Powell, from a student of ours. Looking back at your time at Kiski and academic career, what is something that you wish you could tell your younger self, other than what we just talked about in Clark Hall being a really bad idea?
Oh boy, I have so much that I would share with my younger self. It's a really long list. I think probably the thing that the thing I would probably say most clearly is, don't be afraid to fail. I think I went into a lot of the track meets that I ran, the academic work that I did, afraid of failure. And so as a result, I think I didn't take the risks that I should have taken. And I've never had that entrepreneurial gene. I was never going to be a Jeff Bezos or a Bill Gates. Number one, because I'm not, remotely that smart. Number two, because I just didn't have that thing in me to sort of step out and take those chances. I think in my younger days, and even to a degree now, I've been really risk averse. And so I think it's really important when you find those moments where you can take risks to take them. Take educated risks, take informed risks, take risks that have potentially strong positive payoffs. That's what I would tell. It's a great question. I would tell myself to take more risks and don't be afraid of failure.
Okay, thanks. Good question, Tyler. I don't have another question yet posted. I have John Lombardo expressing his disappointment that he's never heard the Clark Hall story. So
Thanks, Mr. Lombardo.
none of us like it when John's upset. So
no,
John, we're sorry.
Look, there's a reason I waited like 30 years to tell that story.
Okay, we have another question. It's from a senior, Aku Black. Being from the Deep South in a place like Jacksonville, how do you feel about this being Kiski's first year acknowledging Dr. King Day as a day of reverence and not an open house?
Yeah, so so this is an interesting question, and I've really grappled with Dr. King's legacy and the legacy of civil rights leaders in general. And let me say a couple things on this. Human beings are fallible. All of us are fallible, and I think it is really important to remember that, for all of the good things that we do, we all make mistakes. And as I have shared, one hopes that we learn from those mistakes, and you don't make the same mistake twice. Well, we very often do. Well, don't make the same mistake a third time. I think struggling with the legacy of Dr. King and the civil rights movement, it's complicated. That era was really complicated. For example, Dr. King was really torn about what to do in terms of voicing support or disappointment for LBJ's engagement in the Vietnam War. Martin Luther King was a complicated figure in history. I mean, did some really incredible things, but I think it is important to remember all of the people who were involved in the struggle in the 1960s, really most importantly, probably 1965 to 1968. I would point to a couple things in particular. The tension between Dr. King and Stokely Carmichael, that was very real. Dr. King had a nonviolent approach to activism, and that was controversial at the time. Stokely Carmichael was at the other end of the spectrum. Stokely Carmichael actually advocated for really, not turning the other cheek, but if you get hit back. And they disagreed, Martin Luther King Jr. and Stokely Carmichael. And so I think what we have struggled with as a country and sometimes struggled with as institutions, Brendan, in this case, to your question is, which figures from the civil rights movement do we choose to celebrate and why, and how do we think about it in its totality? So I can't make any judgments about, when people choose to celebrate the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. or who else they choose to celebrate. But I think it's important to remember all of the other people who were, who were critical in that moment, including people like Harry Belafonte, who were heavily involved, Marion Wright Edelman, who was heavily involved. Not all of the, look, it's easy now to look back in hindsight and find all of the good and meaningful things that individuals did. But at the time, it was not that straightforward. It was not that simple. There were riots in LA. There were riots in Chicago. Martin Luther King was not hailed as a hero and a champion everywhere he went. So that complicated legacy, we look back at now in a very different way with a very different lens. But I think what's really important is to take from, all of the incredible things that Martin Luther King Jr. did, all of the incredible things that came out of the civil rights movement, and remember how far we've come in how short a period of time. If Brendan, if you can humor me with one more quick sort of anecdote on this or sort of historical reference, it wasn't long. There were two things that also came out of the civil rights movement that were really, really important to remember. And you heard about many of them in the introductory remarks, but let me mention one more for you as well. Dr. King was actually instrumental in the fair housing movement. And so it was allies of Dr. King who were not Black. It was white allies, and it was Hispanic allies, and it was Asian allies who helped the movement. And part of the reason why they were so helpful was to expose the inequities that existed in housing. And so what they found was that when Black families would go into real estate offices, the Black real estate agents would say, we don't have anything for you, or, you know, there's nothing here that we can rent you or sell you. 5 minutes later, a white family walks in, white family who was associated with the civil rights movement, and the real estate person would show them like the entire portfolio of real estate offerings. And so it was actually Martin Luther King who helped transform the opportunity for Black Americans, equal access to fair housing. And a lot of that, by the way, I would commend a book to your attention. It's called The Color of Law, A Forgotten History of How Our Government Segregated America. It's a really powerful book and a really interesting history. It's written by a gentleman by the name of Richard Rothstein. So I definitely recommend you read that, because it wasn't that long ago. The other thing that I would point out, this will sound like a long-winded answer to your very short question, Brendan, but you know, in historical terms, I think it's important to remember. Also remember the history of Supreme Court rulings, and one that's really important to me is Loving versus Virginia, which was about a couple. This is also in the late 1960s, about a couple an interracial couple who wanted to get married. And the laws at the time in the state of Virginia prohibited interracial marriage. I am the child of interracial marriage. And I was born shortly after the Supreme Court ruled that interracial marriage was constitutional, was legal. And it blows my mind to think that just a few years before my birth, my parents could not legally have been married, just a few years before I was born. That's stunning to me. And so, you know, that's the history of the Deep South. You know, I think it's the history of a lot of America to continue to grapple with things. And so how we choose to celebrate this movement, how we choose to think about and remember the progress we've made is up to us as individuals and institutions. But I think it's also important to remember that, like, people like you, Brendan, you know, you've got to continue this fight too.
Okay, thank you. So I've got two more questions that have been posted, and then one comment. The comment is Mr. Orsatti would like credit for being at the scene in Clark Hall.
He was, that's right. Mr.
Does-
Orsatti and Mr. Whipple, I think, was also in that.
I think that makes him guilty of aiding and abetting, but that's something we can get into at another time. Mrs. Poston, our president of the library and all library affairs, is asking you a very important question that I'm sure you think about a lot, and the young people that you see on a daily basis, and certainly those of us as educators. What are the struggles that you think that that boys specifically face today that maybe you didn't have to face when you were at Kiski in the late 80s, early 90s?
Yeah. This is an easy one, and so I'll keep my answer brief so that we can answer this last question from Mr. Finks as well. That's easy. It's the social media pressure. Yeah, hands down, without question. Like, I think you know, in my time at Kiski, you know, bear in mind, like, there were no, you know, this will sound super old fashioned. We didn't have cell phones. I wasn't texting girls. You know, like, I was in the library trying to figure out the Dewey Decimal System. Like, my life was really simple. I ran, I studied, I stayed out of trouble. I was a neat freak. I was on the chess team. I ran track. Like, my life was very straightforward. I had no distractions. I had zero distractions. I think growing up now, as the boys do in the social media world, where you are competing for likes or competing for followers, or you know, having to update your, you know, your Instagram feed, or have the coolest TikTok, or whatever it happened, that's crushing. I can't imagine being a, you know, a 15 to 18-year-old facing that kind of pressure, because I think it's immense pressure. I imagine it's immense pressure, and I'm super happy that I didn't have to face it then. But I think that struggle to navigate, you know, the popularity, the social pressure, the publicness of everything that you do, or that maybe you feel pressured to do. That's hard. I don't envy you that, but I hope for all the Kiski boys who are on this, you have the inner strength, the inner wherewithal to feel comfortable stepping back from it and not letting your lives be lived through social media, but through your actual lives.
I would bet you that the majority of adults, if we could see them, we were all nodding our heads at your response there. Okay, and you already saw Dr. Darren Finks's question. That's from our college counseling office director, and that is a really good question about how Dr. King's work and legacy has affected the way you direct your office of admission.
Yeah, yeah. So this is a really, really good question. I think without it, so this is a really good question. And let me just first say, I in no way compare my impact to the impact of Martin Luther King or any of the civil rights leader, Marion Wright Edelman, Stokely Carmichael. I don't compare myself in any way to any of the people who, LBJ, who signed the Civil Rights Act. I don't compare myself to any of them in any way. Let me just preface my answer with that. I think about the little things I can do to make a difference is really what it is in my life. And so I am incredibly fortunate now to be in this position where, as Dean of Admissions at an Ivy League institution, I get to set policy. I get to inform and make policy that can impact generations of students. And, look, the work we do at Brown, I hope will have positive ripple effects. We have about 1,600 students who come in this year, about 1,700 who come in every year. So, do I think that, that is going to immediately change the world? No. But I think we can send signals, and I think we can provide opportunities for students who didn't have them. Let me give you one example of this. So this is another. This will be a very quick story, but a young man who went around a couple of years ago, a young man from Southern California, from Chula Vista. For those of you who don't know Chula Vista, it is a tough neighborhood. This is a young man whose brother was shot by a member of a gang. This is a young man who got through high school with all A's, good test score, not stellar, and just wanted to stay safe and go to school and wanted to get out of that neighborhood. So he applied to Brown, having never seen the place, but he had done his research and wanted to come. And so he was admitted, and then lo and behold, his senior grades came in and they weren't good. They just weren't good at all. So we admitted him early decision. So it was his only option. It was the only place he got in. We had been thrilled to admit him. Low income brown kid like me from Chula Vista, California. I was from Jacksonville, obviously. But when we got his final year senior grades, his grades had just tanked. And I said, I just don't think we can do this. And so we told him he had to take a year off before he came to Brown, get his mind right. And so a couple months go by and he writes me an email and he says, Mr. Powell, I'm really struggling out here. This is essentially this is gangland. I don't know what I can do. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to come out and visit you. And so I actually flew out. I have a good friend who is the commander of SEAL Team 1. I mentioned these connections. So my good friend's commander of SEAL Team 1 in Coronado, and Chula Vista aren't too far away from each other. So I go out and see my friend who's on the SEAL teams and make time to see this young man. His name's Cottrell. And so Cottrell and I have breakfast. And he tells me that the reason his grades tanked is because his father had just been incarcerated halfway through his senior year. And his brother was getting more and more involved in gang life. And he just wanted to get out. And he was just trying his best to support his mother. And at that point, I said, you know what? This isn't right. We didn't make the right decision to make you take a year off. It's not helping you take this year off. And so I flew back to Brown and I corralled a group of faculty and alumni and our admissions and financial aid teams. And I said, I don't care what we have to do. We've got to get this kid to Brown. We've got to get him here now. And so the sort of the answer to the question about how Dr. King's work impacts my life in admissions and my work in admissions is I've thought about grace. I think about grace. I think about mercy. I think about opportunity. I think about fairness. And I think about, really trying to give people a chance. And so Cottrell, who is now in his junior year at Brown, is pre-med. He's got nearly all A's. He stays on campus almost all year round because it's safer for him here than it is there. And so the sort of the history, the lessons that I learned from Dr. King are those. They're about grace, they're about mercy, they're about opportunity, they're about fairness, and they're about passing on to another generation those lessons so that they can continue to do the good things that I know they're capable of. So thank you for that question, Darren. I hope that's I didn't intend for that to be too saccharine a response, but the work that I can do, really. The work that I can do every single day, the humility, if I can just take this one moment, I know we have a hard stop at 8. I approach everything I do with great humility, and it's a humility that I learned at Kiski. And so it is with great humility, that I truly appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with all of you tonight. And just one more huge round of thanks to everyone who made this night possible and who thought wisely, or who may now be deeply regretting inviting me to to do this session. Whichever side of the coin you're on, I thank you.
It looks like it's going to work out nicely here. That's the last question I have, and we are at 7:58. So at this point, on behalf of the Kiski community, Logan, we are so grateful that you took the time to talk to us, and what a great message to deliver and certainly create some perspective for all of us. So I don't know what the equivalent to a virtual round of applause or standing ovation is, but I assure you, whatever it is, you're getting it right now.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
So, well, there you go. So if there are other questions, I guess we can get them to you at some point. But at this point, I'm going to say something to the Kiski boys that hasn't been said in a long time, because we don't have in-person assemblies. But study hall starts in 2.5 minutes. I'm just kidding. It starts in between 10 and 15 minutes. Please get back to your dorms. And Mr. Powell, thank you again so much, and we'll stay in touch. Okay.
It is my pleasure, and just for everyone's reference, for anyone who wants to talk to me at any point, I put my email address in the chat to the panelists, and I'm putting it in now. Let me see if I can send this. I just put in, I don't know if it showed up. In any case, my email address is logan_powell@brown.edu, logan_powell@brown.edu. So for anyone who ever wants to reach out to me at any time, please let me know. I'm hopefully always there for you, and always a Kiski boy.
Great, man. All right. Thanks again. We'll
All right.
talk to you soon. All right.
Thank you. All right.
Good night, everyone. See you.
Bye.